where you are calling from in the world, it would be great. So just so we can get a sense of who's in the room. And well, nice. Portugal, amazing. Athens. I know we had people registering from Canada, the USA, Sweden, I believe I saw, France. So we have people coming from all over, which is very exciting. It's very, very nice to be here with you all. My name is Lia Papazoglou. I'm the co-founder of Ecogenia. I am calling you from northern Greece. So hello, for those of you that are in Greece. I'm in Litochoro specifically, so a small village about an hour south of Thessaloniki. I'm very happy to be here today. Want to just kind of welcome you all with a few very quick housekeeping things. And from there, we're going to take it away and get started with the subject at hand. So I'll only be a few moments. Today's webinar is going to be 1.5 hours long. The first hour, we have Tyrone from the San Francisco Department of the Environment joining us. That is really the purpose why we're all here, I think, to hear about their climate action plan. And after that hour, there will be time within that hour, I should say, for some questions. So if you do have questions, I'll explain how that will go. After that hour, Anastasios and myself, the co-founder of Dataphoria, and me, the co-founder of Ecogenia, will spend a few moments talking about our organizations, open it up for some more questions and discussion, and we will be done within 1.5 hours. The webinar today will be recorded. So we will send that out to everybody that has registered after, and the recording will be available if you'd like to share this with any colleagues or friends or people that are interested. So if you have questions while Tyrone is presenting today, please use the chat box, as some of you are already doing, which is great. Put your questions in there. You can use the chat box or the Q&A box. I will be keeping an eye on both, so don't worry about which place to put it. I'll be looking at both. And when Tyrone is finished, I will go through and kind of collect those questions and ask them on behalf of you, back to Tyrone. So that's how we'll do that. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, you can just put them right in the chat box or the Q&A box, whichever you prefer. So with all of that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Anastasios, who I will let introduce himself more properly, but he is an advisor to Ecogenia, and the reason why we are all here today, this was really his idea, and I will let him explain, introduce himself, and take it away from there. So with that, Anastasios, please.
Thank you, Leah. So hi, everyone, and it's a pleasure to have you here on what we feel is going to be a very informative and inspiring session. So as Leah mentioned, I'm Anastasios, one of the advisors of Ecogenia, also the co-founder of Dataphoria, a sustainability analytics startup. And the way this all started was when we went back to the States with Ecogenia and the team to see what they were sort of their efforts there in terms of mitigating and adapting to climate change. And then we got the opportunity to visit the San Francisco environment facilities and hear from them about their own climate action plan. And this coming at a time where we have the Net Zero Cities initiative in Europe, across Europe, but also in Greece. We felt we've been talking about net zero, we've been talking about net neutrality, what cities can do, but we haven't seen that in action so much. So we felt it was time to join forces across the Atlantic and hear from what our friends in San Francisco are doing. We certainly hope you'll get a lot of ideas and inspiration out of this webinar. And we are so looking forward to get this started. So this session is co-hosted between Ecogenia, Dataphoria, and of course with the help of our friends at Impact Hub Athens, supported by Google, who are providing the infrastructure for the webinar. Also Iphoria.net, who is one of our advisors and supporters for this event, and is under the auspices of the EU Climate Pact as a partner event of the European Green Week. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Tyrone Jue, who is the acting director of the San Francisco Environment Department, and he's overseeing the department's mission to advance climate protection and enhance the quality of life for all San Franciscans. Now, Tyrone has more than 21 years of experience working in government and has worked directly in the administrations of San Francisco mayors, including Willie Brown, Gavin Newsom, Ed Lee, and London Breed. He also brings 12 years of water and energy utility experience, building support for over 10 billion of capital improvements into the San Francisco's regional drinking water system and local sewer system. Now, as director of the board of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Tyrone has passed new regulatory rules and supported programs to reduce air pollution and improve the health outcome for the entire Bay Area. As I hear, Tyrone, a lot, like an impressive experience on a lot of different climate-related disciplines, which I'm looking forward to hear about how they come into play in San Francisco's Climate Action Plan. So with that, over to you, Tyrone, and the main aspect of our webinar.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and greetings, everyone. No matter where you are in the world, it's morning time here in San Francisco. I know it's just early evening in Greece. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about what the team from Ecogenia learned when they were in San Francisco about our journey and what we're doing here in our city. So I have a presentation to share with everyone, and then we'll open it up for questions afterwards. So here comes the dangerous part as I'm switching to sharing screens. So I'm going to ask to make sure this works. Does that look good?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Again, really excited to be able to talk to everyone about the journey we are on in San Francisco. It's a journey that we all are on, and we're all in different stages, and it's important to acknowledge that. But I think before we begin to talk about what we're doing in San Francisco, it's important to lay some ground rules, some foundational facts that we all need to agree upon before moving forward. The first foundation is that we have to acknowledge our role as people of this planet in resulting in the greenhouse gas emissions that are being emitted into the air and exacerbating this global climate change and crisis we see in front of us. The picture you see here was taken in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. There was a wildfire in California several hundred miles away, and I woke up one morning, was going into work, and the skies were completely orange and dark. The streets were empty because of COVID already, and it felt like I was in another world, another planet, another time. But this is the future that is actually the reality right now. So we have to acknowledge our role as people in what we've done to this planet. The other foundational thing we have to think and remember is that we all know what needs to be done. There's no mystery here. There's no magical silver bullet. We actually know what needs to be done in order to reverse the effects of climate change. And so if we take these two together, if we take the fact that we are the cause, we have to be part of the solution. And that's why I'm so excited to be talking to all of you today, because all of you are here because you want to be part of this solution. Yes, we need governments around the world to lead the way. That is a fact. We cannot move fast enough unless we have all of our leaders on the national, state, and local level and in the community level working together on this challenge. But with that, we also have to recognize the important place each of us has and the important role that each of us plays and can play in making a difference. And this is where I begin our story about what we're doing here in San Francisco. But before I begin, I kind of have to explain what the Environment Department is and what we do. As Anastasia said, we are the department. We are a city department in San Francisco with the responsibility of providing solutions that advance climate protection and enhancing the quality of life for all San Franciscans. As I said, these aren't future issues we're dealing with. These are issues right in front of us today, even in San Francisco. We see kind of the climate issues that are in front of us in our city around 4 tracks. We've experienced, just like the rest of the world, the hottest days in our city's history over these past few years. We're projecting sea level rise. As a city that's surrounded by water on 3 sides, we're projecting sea level rise impacting all of our transportation infrastructure, our buildings, and our downtown area. We're seeing massive storms. We just had massive extreme storms that flooded our streets and flooded our homes and businesses just this past winter. And as I mentioned before, we had a significant drought that we just are starting to come out of, resulting in huge wildfires over the last few years throughout the state of California, bringing some of the worst air quality our city and our state has ever seen in its history. So these aren't future problems, these are problems we are having to grapple with now. In San Francisco, we've prided ourselves on having a long history and a long track record of environmentalism. We sometimes like to say that the birthplace of the environmentalism movement was right here in San Francisco. Whether that's true or not, we have been making tremendous strides by keeping the attention and focus on this important area. So as we look to what we're doing in terms of emissions reductions, we baseline our emissions on our 1990 levels. And when you look to see where we are as of 2020, even though population has grown by 21% in the city, we've managed to reduce our emissions by almost half. So we're on the right track, but there's a lot more that still needs to be done. And where are the remaining emissions? They're primarily from 2 sectors and 1 inevitable source. About 80, almost 90% of our emissions come from buildings and transportation. And the source of those emissions from each of those sectors, you can probably guess it, are fossil fuels. The natural gas that's feeding into our buildings for heating, and the fossil fuels that are fueling the cars and trucks on our roadways. That's it. It's that simple. We have to get off of fossil fuels, and we all know this. So to start addressing how we begin to phase out fossil fuels in our own city, we went through a process of developing a climate action plan. Our mayor, London Breed, set forth a goal to say, we need a plan of action, we need a course, we need a chart of direction for our city and our citizens so that we can rally upon this important effort. And we came up with this climate action plan and adopted it in 2021, and it has 31 strategies and 159 supporting actions, all grounded in science and data. Very simply, it says our goal is to reduce emissions in San Francisco and achieve net zero emissions by 2040. It sets a nearer term target to reduce our emissions by 61% by 2030. And as I mentioned earlier, we're on our way. But as we all know, it becomes harder and harder to continue to get those emissions reductions as you begin to move forward into other strategies. But equally as important as coming up with this plan, it's how we came up with the plan. Because it's not enough to just set a goal to say, hey, we want to be net zero emissions. How do you want to get to that future? How do we make sure that future doesn't leave anyone behind? And so as we developed the climate action plan for San Francisco, we took 4 lenses and 4 approaches. 1, looking at racial and social equity. How do we ground our plan in principles based on racial and social justice practices to address the injustices on many of our communities? How do we use the climate action plan to improve the health and well-being of all of our citizens, particularly those that have been underserved and left behind for so long? how do we use the climate action plan to stimulate our economy and not just grow our economy, but ensure that those jobs and opportunities are going to those communities, again, left behind so they can be part of this transition and this transformation. And finally, as we're implementing this climate action plan, how do we make our communities, how do we make our neighborhoods more resilient so that no matter what disaster comes their way in the future, they're ready to bounce back even stronger than ever. So as we took this approach of looking through these 4 buckets, it took 2 years to develop this plan. We didn't do it in our offices alone. We didn't do it with a piece of paper on a computer saying this is exactly what we need to do. We worked with the community in San Francisco to help develop our plan. We worked with other departments that have responsibilities on different actions as part of our climate action plan. We worked with over 80 people from 20 different city departments. We interacted and reached 1/3 that we did over 2 years. And we took all of this feedback through surveys, through meetings, through community presentations to come up with that plan in 2021, which we then embedded and enacted into city code and city law. Led by our mayor, led by our legislators, we adopted this as part of our environment code so that this would be our North Star of where to go. And it passed unanimously with no issues and no problems whatsoever because we had the backing and support of community behind us. What the plan says, as I said, it really isn't a mystery, like I said, of where and how we need to get to this net zero future. It divided up the categories into 6 different categories and developed targets for each. So on energy supply, by 2040, our entire city has to be electric, and that electricity needs to be powered and coming from renewable energy sources like wind and solar. On transportation, it isn't just about electrifying. It's about moving people into low carbon trips and sustainable transit. That means how do we promote biking and walking? And for everything else that's on the road, how do we electrify what remains? But in a dense urban city, in a dense urban environment, you cannot get there alone just through vehicle electrification. You have to shift people into more sustainable transportation modes. One really innovative thing that we included as part of our climate action plan is housing. You don't see this often in climate action plans, but our mayor, our people in the environment department felt this was important because as we're looking at energy and the production of energy, the consumption of energy, and the trips needed through transportation, we have to be able to have housing stock nearby where people are working. That's how you reduce demand in our transportation system and reduce the energy consumption. And that's how you keep our cities affordable, not just to those that can afford it, but to everyone that is important in making our cities thrive. And so we have set asides and goals in our climate action plan for every new development that 30% of those developments have to be designated for affordable purposes. That means for low and moderate income individuals. And we also need to be producing more housing to keep up with this pent-up demand. And this is something San Francisco, in all honesty, is still struggling with, and we're still trying to make progress on. The other sector we have a target on is buildings. I said buildings account for about 40% of those emissions. We have to get our buildings off of fossil fuels. And so we've set these goals and targets to electrify our buildings starting by 2040 and get on this path towards reducing our reliance on natural gas for our heating. We've also changed our approach, like many others, on zero waste. You know, we were one of the pioneers around the world in terms of developing a 3-bin system where you have your black bin for landfill, you have a blue bin for recycling, and you have a green bin for composting. What we know now is it's not just looking at the tail end in terms of how people sort things, yes, that is absolutely important. We have to start looking upstream and reducing the generation of waste to begin with. And so we set a target of reducing our waste generation by 15% by 2030 and reducing what's sent to landfill by 50%. And finally, our Healthy Ecosystems chapter, our sixth strategy, is about restoring people's connection to nature. I'm a big proponent that we have to enhance the biodiversity and nature, especially in our urban environments, because that disconnect, we've created a disconnect between people and place. And we need to reestablish that connection if we're going to come together as cities, as communities, to know what we're fighting for, which is we're fighting for this planet. And we also need to utilize the natural systems that this planet has by reducing emissions and also allowing the planet to begin healing itself by sequestering carbon. We've started to make progress already, even though we enacted our climate action plan in 2021. We've started making progress thanks to our leadership in the city. We've already banned natural gas in all new buildings. We've already put in requirements if a development requires parking, you have to pre-wire and pre-install the electric vehicle charging required for those new developments. And we've also put in a bold new requirement that all commercial parking lots have to have electric vehicle charging availability for fleets or for people in the public. This year, we're also going to start moving on our generation component of our climate action plan. And we're going to be proposing a mandate to require reusables in restaurants. During COVID, we saw a huge transition away because of the health scare around COVID, that people started going to paper plates and plastic forks and knives because they were worried about the transmission of COVID. And now we need to ground everyone back into the very, very important reality that one, that's more expensive for those businesses to continue to purchase those items, which we found through research. And two, the amount of energy and carbon emitted from the production and transportation of those is far greater than what you think. And so mandating that all dining establishments use reusables is something we're going to be proposing this year, as well as taking some of our largest venues, our sports stadiums, and requiring they use reusables on sites. Think about all the cups wasted if you go to a football game or to a baseball game here or to a basketball game in the city. That's hundreds of tons wasted every single time there's an event. And finally, on biodiversity, we've created a nursery to start growing these trees and allowing these trees to basically enhance our urban canopy throughout the city. One of the most wonderful and exciting things about this time is we feel in San Francisco, we're finally not alone. We've always had the state of California, who has been a very progressive ally in the fight on climate. What we've always been missing in the United States is leadership at our highest levels. Yes, we all know politicians are great at stating goals and policies, but for the first time, there's money behind those statements, thanks to the leadership of President Biden, Vice President Harris, and our congressional leaders. There were two bills that were passed, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, that's allocated $430 billion to cities to help them with their transition. And one of the most amazing things about this money allocation is that the administration has set a goal that 40% of those resources need to go to underserved communities. So it's not just going to those that already are living in wealth and opulence. It's going to those communities that have historically been left behind, and it's going to be so helpful in this transition. In addition to the state of California, thanks to the leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom, continues to allocate money towards climate initiatives. And in this next budget, it's going to be allocating about $50 billion towards this work. So combined, we're starting to see synergy that like we've never seen before, which I believe is going to provide a catalyst to springboard all of our efforts in our city and especially in San Francisco. And thanks to our mayor and our leaders, we're also making investments here locally. Last year, we issued $2 million, the largest amount of grants ever in our city's history and our department's history. We issued $2 million of community grants that went out to community-based organizations and nonprofits and educational partners to begin doing the work. We're not going to reach our climate goals simply by government coming in and trying to fix everything. We need everyone bought in to the future we need to get to, and government has to play a role in supporting those organizations necessary to build those networks and build that energy to move forward. We've also turned on its head, instead of a government-led process to electrify our buildings for our low and moderate income people in the city, we developed a climate equity hub. This was a concept that was actually advocated for and pushed by our community members during that climate action plan process. And the Climate Equity Hub sits as a third-party nonprofit run by a community-based organization that we just announced a few weeks ago. They will be the convening partner for labor, for our workforce, to begin the just transition, and also to give access to those in the low and moderate income socioeconomic spectrum, access to the funds and resources necessary for them to be able to electrify their buildings first, so that they can reap the health benefits that they so desperately need. And finally, we're looking to the future because even with all the money I've outlined from the federal and state government and what we're allocating from the city of San Francisco, we need billions more. And we're coming together with a plan, looking forward at how much it will cost to implement our climate action plan in San Francisco, and starting to lay out a roadmap to develop those funding solutions with the people of San Francisco going forward into the next 5 to 10 years. Now, I've covered a lot about what we do. It's really complicated. And so one of the most important things we can do is to explain everything simply to people. So the way I encapsulate the entire climate action plan, all 159 strategies, is in 4 simple concepts: 0, 80, 100, roots. 0 is zero waste, 0 toxics. 80 is 80% of trips made through low carbon forms. 100 for 100% renewable energy and getting ourselves off of fossil fuels. And roots, about enhancing nature and our connection with nature and using nature to sequester carbon from the air. So I've taken all of those previous slides and I've distilled them down into 4 concepts. And this framework has been amazing for us to be able to communicate what our goals are to the public. But similarly, you can't just have one way of talking about a subject. You have to be able to design your campaigns and your work depending on the audience you're trying to reach. And so this is just an example of all the various campaigns and artwork that we use as we engage with people through our different forms. The one in the middle is something that we are developing and have been implementing in San Francisco, focus on our primarily immigrant workforce working in nail salons. The folks that are typically left behind and not thought of. You know, we want them to be in an environment working with polishes that are non-toxic and solutions that are less toxic or non-toxic as well. And so we have a specific campaign and outreach effort in language going out business by business to educate the workers and educate the owners about all of their available options. And that's what it's going to take. It's not going to take press releases only or broad announcements. It's about the on-the-ground work. And that's what we also do in our environment department. We have teams devoted to going out into communities and working directly with businesses and with residents. We have an environmental justice team that goes to those underserved neighborhoods and looks and works with our public housing and affordable housing to help them with our zero waste goals, and also help them in reducing the amount of toxics in their environment for pest management. We have an environmental education team that goes out every day into schools and teaches youth at a very young age, because we know youth are going to be the future leaders that we need to depend on. And having them as part of this movement is critical, because we know that youth can also influence their parents. We have a green business program that goes out to all of our small and medium-sized businesses to help them be more energy efficient, to switch to reusables, to go green in terms of the chemicals used for cleaning. And we work with businesses one-on-one on that transition. And finally, we have an Environment Now team that is out in the city every single day and every weekend, going to fairs and community events, making our presence known and spreading the word about climate action and the urgency behind it. And finally, as I wrap up this presentation, I want to remind everyone that all of you, by being here this morning, wherever you are, is taking charge, is taking ownership. You chose to be here rather than be anywhere else. You chose to learn about what other cities are doing so that you can in turn hopefully inform your own city in terms of the policies moving forward. And the message we have to be putting forward is not the image I used earlier about the wildfires and orange skies. Yes, that is the reality, but we have to give everyone hope. And that hope comes from the work that each of us has as individuals, the control we have over our actions, our purchases, who we choose to elect into office, and what we choose to work on, and who we choose to work for. Those are all things within our control. And when we make choices that speak to our values, that is what is going to catalyze the movement we need locally, within our communities, and in our highest reaches of government to get to the goals of a fossil-free future. And with that, I will end my presentation and just thank everyone again for the time to talk to all of you, and thank all of the co-hosts for putting this event on.
Thank you very, very much, Tyrone. It's always so exciting to hear about all the things that San Francisco is doing. I don't live there anymore, but I did live in the Bay Area for a while, so I'm still very proud of all of the work that you all are doing. So one question that came in the chat, and I have a few more as well, is how has San Francisco collaborated with other cities across the state and really across the country in building out and implementing the climate action plan?
That is such a wonderful question. We belong to several different networks in order to scale our work. This isn't, again, something we can solve here locally, just alone in San Francisco in terms of climate change. And so we work with organizations like C40 Cities, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. We work with a Pacific Coast Collaborative, which is western region of North America. So we have the major cities represented, the major states of California, Oregon, and Washington, and also the province of British Columbia. And in all of these different networks, we're collaborating and sharing ideas about what we're doing in our individual cities. Because again, we don't have all the answers in San Francisco, and we never say we have all the answers. We have some things that we're doing well, but we can always learn and do better. And if we take that approach, like we always take, I think that's where we start to get energy and begin to scale the work. So just like when Ecogenia was here in San Francisco, learning from us, those are the knowledge exchanges that are most powerful, because you get to take away from each other and become better.
Yes, I could not agree more. I think our team learned more just by being around others with different ideas and learning from each other. I mean, that's such a invaluable space to be creating and be a part of. So thank you for that. Another question that has come up is just if you could elaborate a bit more about the department structure, right? You have some really interesting teams, and what are they practically doing, not just on a day-to-day, but how is their workflow and how are their goals related to the climate action plan, and what are they kind of practically doing? So we can get a sense of how it's run and what the teams are like and what they're trying to achieve.
Wonderful question. I should have an organizational chart slide in there. So all of our work, because all of our teams were involved in the Climate Action Plan development, has been aligned with that, right? So the Climate Action Plan is our North Star for our department. And if you look at the program areas we have experts working on policies and implementation of policies on zero waste. We have a clean transportation team that's working on transitioning people away to lower forms of carbon, and also electrifying our city fleets. We have a buildings team focused on removing natural gas from our buildings and setting policies and working on working groups and developing community relationships and working on the Climate Equity Hub on the implementation of that strategy. We have an energy team that goes out and basically does energy efficiency work in all of our buildings. And we have an outreach team, as I mentioned, kind of that served as kind of a broader arm to do a lot of the outreach and marketing and on the ground work. And I feel like, oh, I'm sorry. And then we have a toxics team also, as I talked about the Healthy Nail Salon program, trying to promote less toxic and non-toxic alternatives for cleaning products and other ways of doing your work. We have a team devoted to that. And so each of these teams have experts in their own right. So they're usually a combination and blend of policy experts. So people thinking through the long-term policies that we've outlined in the Climate Action Plan and how we're working towards those goals based on the timelines that we've set forth. And then we have embedded within the teams the engagement and outreach, in addition to the additional outreach teams that I mentioned earlier, doing the work, getting the word out. And I can just speak a little bit about how the Environment Department sits within the city. And this may be true for a lot of places. The Environment Department doesn't have regulatory control necessarily of every aspect of the Climate Action Plan, right? You're not going to have one organization that is responsible for transit, for utilities, for the roadways, for tree planting, right? That's too much for any one organization. And every city is probably going to be divided up across these different sectors. And so the role that we play in the Environment Department is we play that central coordinating role, or that hub role. And so, as I said, we worked with over 80 people from over a dozen city departments, and they connected into the environment to also be part of developing those strategies in the Climate Action Plan. And in the Climate Action Plan, those departments are spelled out as the owners of those strategies. So when we talk about transit, we involved in San Francisco what is the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency in those discussions, so that we could tie into their plans around public transit, around bike infrastructure, and all of the plans that they have. But then it guided their approach on how they were designing all of their long-term plans for their agency. Similarly, we've done that with the utility side, on the energy side, where we've kind of mapped out with them, like, okay, how do we get to 2040? What are your goals and what are the things that you can do? And again, we assigned ownership. And by passing this through ordinance, or by adopting this in city code, we gave the Environment Department authority to basically enforce movement on these issues, right? So we developed all of these strategies in concert, got everyone on the same page, worked with community, and then we brought this forward to our mayor, to our legislators, and said, this is our North Star. We not only just want to have this as a book sitting on everyone's desk, we want this in law, so that everyone has to follow and move forward in this direction together. And that's the role that the Environment Department plays.
Wow, that's amazing. We have a few other questions coming in. A reminder for everybody listening, you can put questions either in the chat box or in the Q&A. I'm looking at both, so don't worry. So a question from Adam, very specific question about the Bay Area. So can you address your efforts in the affordable housing space? So new buildings, et cetera, which is one of the big impact areas, big focus areas for the Bay Area. And a sub question to that was, for example, would you allow for private initiatives, P3s, et cetera? So Adam, if you would like to elaborate, please do so in the chat. Hopefully I did it justice. And Tyrone, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, let's just say, affordable housing development, those are essentially P3s in some sense, because we're partnering oftentimes with a nonprofit developer, or sometimes a for-profit developer, on developing those projects and providing funding from the city, leveraging funding because we're using a nonprofit developer to access maybe federal or state credits that local government wouldn't be eligible for. And so we do have examples of P3s all throughout. There are certain things that it makes sense for, others where it doesn't, and it's kind of, it definitely differs. As far as our housing goals, it is no secret that we are well short of what we need to be able to produce throughout the state of California and in San Francisco. And this has always been a very contentious issue around how do you build more density, because that has to be part of our climate solution package. We cannot just build out and build, sprawl. We have to build more contained, more dense areas where we can have effective mass transit solutions as well as low carbon solutions to get people around from place to place. And that's going to make a huge difference. And one of actually the biggest differences in our overall carbon footprint is that density, our connection between all of the resources needed when you have that density. Those are important goals, and we have to make progress on it. And so by setting forth that goal in our climate action plan, and I encourage everyone to do this, whether you're in the Bay Area or not, talk to your leaders about also incorporating affordable housing, because again, we have this challenge in San Francisco of being one of the most expensive cities in the world. And that's because of a lack of housing in our city. And we have to be able to address that, because this place cannot be a place of just wealthy people, and the people that are required, that are the backbone of our city, are the workers, right? The blue collar workers, the workers that are serving you at a restaurant or driving your muni vehicles or teaching in your classrooms. We have to make the cities affordable for them and also allow them the opportunity to live close to the place that they work for the reasons I mentioned earlier.
So I feel like this is a good follow-up question that Philip asked. In your opinion, this is a heavy question as an American in the room with a bunch of Europeans, Tyrone. But in your opinion, how can America move away from its car-centric design and the car dependency of Americans to a more public transport-oriented means of kind of living? So kind of a big question, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, right? Because similar to like the fossil fuel question, I mean, one of the reasons why it's so hard to transition is because we've built our society around this model, especially in the United States, where we focus on everyone having their own personal vehicle. And look, we have to do two things. I think one, what I see as far as the dynamic in the conversation is you have people who are just off in one camp saying, public transit only, biking only, no cars. And then on the other camp, you have only cars, no biking. I just want my own vehicle to drive around. And the answer is always somewhere in the middle, right? And we know this, that it's never going to be a one size solution fits all. But if you look to where we are right now, we're definitely overweighted in the United States towards the car-centric side of the space. So I completely understand why the advocates on the other side are saying, we need to move in this direction and trying to shift the conversation. And I think the best thing we can do as cities is to provide that example of how transit can work if it's done and planned correctly. So as we do the new developments, we're not only saying, hey, build it all electric, no natural gas. You actually have to submit a plan to the city, a transit plan around how people will get around. And you cannot build huge parking lots anymore in the city as well when you're building these new developments. We cannot waste space in our cities building huge lots for these individual cars that encourages a car-centric culture. We have to be building our developments with what are those transit connection points from the public transit side, from the biking side, and is that infrastructure there? And if it isn't there, those new developments, instead of just being able to profit off the back of using the infrastructure, have to invest in the infrastructure as part of a fee to help upgrade the infrastructure with the new people that would be residing in that new development. So it's all part of that planning conversation, and it has to start there. You can't just expect everyone to kind of reverse. You got to start where you can in terms of like real sustainable development and planning from the beginning.
So a follow-up question and related to another question in the chat. I love when this happens. So in the beginning of your presentation, you did a great job, highlighting the science and the research and the data, specifically around sector-based emissions in San Francisco. So I'd be curious if you could speak a bit to what that process was like, because I imagine that was very resource intensive, involved probably many stakeholders, but it's so important to have that baseline. And then there was a follow-up question a bit in the chat related to food waste. And from what I remember on that slide, food waste didn't come up as one of kind of the hot spots, if you will, of emissions, but maybe I missed it. So first part of the question is if you could talk a bit about how you establish that baseline of sector-based emissions so you could set your goals. And then the question in the chat is related to kind of food waste from supermarkets and restaurants. So is there any work being done around food waste? Is that one of the critical areas that you all have identified? So two-part question.
One wonderful question. On the first part, on the data part, as I said, we've been doing modeling for a very long time in San Francisco. I think there's more standards now today than there were when we started. So we started doing this work back when the Kyoto protocols were first in place. And so that's why our baseline is 1990. And we've been doing kind of our checks and emissions inventory. There's usually a lag time because of the data and the amount of data we have to process. And so as you saw, I have 2020 emissions because it takes a year most of the time, maybe a year and a half, to just process all of the different data inputs to get to that emissions inventory. I think we're getting better. There are definitely more standards and standardized reporting tools and requirements that are being put forward from the Carbon Disclosure Project and from other organizations. And I think that's helping to streamline this a little bit better. But that's where we started. We knew what our emissions were. And then it became as simple as having the conversation with the community and with labor, with everyone on what is reasonable and what seems manageable. Because it's not enough to just say, to throw a number out in the air. I really hate this when everyone just like, I want to set a goal in 5 years to do something, but I have no plan of which to be able to achieve that goal, right? Because that's not really a plan, right? So we wanted to do something bold to make sure that we are driving the conversation the right way, but something grounded in what was possible. So I encourage everyone to actually look at our climate action plan. It's 300 pages long. I didn't have time to go over all the detailed analysis that we did, but you'll see in each sector, we look at how those emissions reductions will occur and over what time period they'll occur and what policies need to happen by year in order to get to that 2040 goal. And we not only did this internally, like I said, we worked with all of our city agencies, and we brought in additional technical resources in the form of a consultant to assist us because there was just so much information and we were trying to do all of this work as we were taking in input. And so we really put a lot of resources to bear as we were developing that plan. Food waste is definitely a big issue. The reason why food waste doesn't show up is what you saw from the emissions pie chart was just our scope 2 emissions, right? Those are just our sector-based emissions of what our output is. We know, just as I talked about zero waste, that isn't our total carbon footprint as it comes to San Francisco, right? We have all of these goods that are coming into the city that are unaccounted for. And I think the scope 3 emissions that now everyone is starting to look at in terms of consumption, that is actually going to be the most revealing number for our cities and for our leaders to be able to take action, because that's when you understand, as I was talking about paper plates, right? When you're a small business, you're like, oh, I bought a stack of 1,000 paper plates and I'm serving people with these paper plates. You don't think about the energy, the water, the fuel that it took to transport there, but all of that is part of that carbon footprint. And then the same thing goes towards dietary changes that are probably going to be required as well. And how do we shift people to reduce their reliance on meat, which is a very carbon intensive production process. And on the issue of food waste, it's definitely in our climate action plan. We've been doing a lot of work in San Francisco to advance that. There's actually our work in San Francisco helped to inform state law and state requirements. And that's what we always pride ourselves in San Francisco, is kind of like doing something first and then having that replicated in the state of California. And so there's a Senate Bill 1383, which passed this law requiring large supermarkets, large food distributors to not waste any of the food during kind of the logistics cycle or transportation cycle of their process, and to basically recapture that food and redistribute it back into those that most need it. And most of the programs that we're redistributing the food back to are our most needy populations, so the people that are homeless, the people that need food assistance within a city. And so we have a growing program that we are proud to have kicked off in San Francisco. I think my last report, I think we captured over like 400,000 pounds of food in about a year and a half of our pilot by just working with vendors, working with supermarkets, and starting to shift and connect logistically how you might be able to move some of that food you might have thrown away and repurpose that to audiences that really need that food. And so we've been doing that work. We're scaling that work also. And so one of the grants we just issued was for the creation of an app tool to kind of reduce the amount of time required to notify a delivery, right? Because this is the logistics part. It sounds great in concept to get people or get food from point A to point B, but the time it takes to get that food and then get it to point B, how do you do that matchmaking? And so one of the grants that we just did several months ago was to help create an app to connect people that have the resource, whether you're a large event or a supermarket, connect you with a delivery kind of intermediary, and then connect you with kind of that last step, which is the nonprofit usually or community organization that's serving the community and making sure that it's as seamless as possible. So when you put in the app, hey, I got 20 bushels of apples, you can get the delivery vehicle, get them to pick it up, and then deliver it right to the place that actually needs the food. So you don't have food just sitting around in a pantry, for example, where they may not need apples, and it's getting to the place where it needs to. And so we're working on that ecosystem, and I'm excited about the work to come.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tyrone. And moving from food to energy, there is a question in the chat on how do you plan to utilize renewable energy sources to electrify the city? And whether you could let us know what is your main source of renewable energy today?
So the main source of renewable energy, so about more than half, about 60 to 70% of our energy is greenhouse gas free. So depending on how you categorize renewable, so we categorize renewable energy as emissions-free energy that isn't nuclear. So that's kind of just our dividing line. Everyone defines it differently, which is okay. That's just how we choose. So anything that's hydroelectric, because we have an amazing hydroelectric system owned by the city that generates clean greenhouse gas-free energy for the city through our water system. So it's delivering water and generating hydropower, wind, solar, and we're ecstatic that now, thanks to the leadership of our governor, there is money being put forward towards offshore wind in 2 different locations. And so this is definitely on the minds of our state regulators. This isn't a problem we can solve alone just within our cities, because our entire grid within the state of California is connected and managed by the state, and it has to be because of where the resources are developed. You're not generating all of your solar and wind in your cities. There's not enough space to do that, right? So you're generating it from a place that's off-site or in an area where there's space available, and then putting that into the grid, and the electrons are flowing where they need to flow. And there was a recent report that, if you look at the state of California, thanks to the policies they've set forward, 60% of the energy being generated in California is clean, renewable energy. And we need to do a better job of that. I think the demand issues are a big challenge, and storage is going to have to play a big role in that in terms of managing how you manage your power loads efficiently, especially during non-solar times when there's less energy generation, because that's going to be key for us taking those remaining natural gas firing plants offline. Is we have to have a way of basically accounting for that energy during the evening. And we also have to account for the growing energy need. As we're electrifying all of our buildings, we're electrifying all of our vehicles and fleets, whether they're public transit or your trucks. We have to have the supporting distribution and transmission infrastructure, as well as the generation. And I think the state is definitely grappling with the transmission distribution infrastructure as we are in a city, because we can set these goals, but if we can't deliver the power to you, then it doesn't matter whether you're generating solar, 150 miles away. We can't get that energy over to your building. So it's something that we're working on right now. And I think because we're passing all of these policies locally and at the state level, it's driving this conversation around the future of our electric grid in the state of California.
Thank you, Tyrone. Very informative, and being conscious of the time, but also seeing we have some good questions and a lot of interest from our chat. We wanted to ask whether you're up for one or two final questions before we wrap up.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Then we'll go to Philip, who has another good question on, during a time where politics are so polarized, how can a middle common ground be found between parties to accept and agree on necessary policy changes to deal with climate change?
I think both sides have to be willing to speak in a language that the other side can understand. One of the biggest problems in political discourse, or even just as you talk to people, is you can't go in there with your own biases and assumptions and what you believe. You have to be able to try to meet people where they are. We think about this from a community organizing perspective, right? We can't sit in our office and say, hey, we're going to organize a community. That's not going to work. You have to go into the community and actually be on the ground talking to people and engaging with them for them to buy in. But when you go into those communities, if you bring your beliefs and where you are through all of your experiences that have shaped your beliefs into that community and don't take into account the beliefs of the community you want to work with, you'll be stopped at the door. You'll never be given entry because you can't speak their language. You don't relate to them. And so I think in order for us to move forward, we have to be able to be willing to have the conversation in a way that the other side can react to. And this goes on both sides. This isn't just us. So I think, sometimes when I'm talking to folks in the Midwest, I don't even talk about climate change, right, as a word, because that's sometimes a triggering word for folks in the Midwest, like, oh, you're one of those. And I've had a fascinating conversation with someone just talking about risk, right? Like, the person had 2 daughters, and I said, let's just play this out from a risk perspective. You can believe in climate change, you may not believe in climate change, but I know you ultimately want what's best for your 2 daughters, for them to grow up in a safe, just world where they have equal opportunity and a fair chance. If you're investing money for them, you're investing money for them in their education fund because you're trying to mitigate that risk in the future, right? You're putting a little bit of investment now to mitigate that risk. That's why you get health insurance and all of these other things. Well, why wouldn't you want to mitigate risk even if you don't believe it? Because the scenario that is at play could be so much worse and push away all of those other risks that you have. So in the essence of, like, why would you want a world that is inhospitable and unfriendly to your 2 daughters? And so even just moving people incrementally along that conversation, he was able to say, like, you're right. Like, I don't have to fully believe in it, but I do want what's best for my 2 daughters. And I'm willing to just make a little bit of a change. And sometimes it's just that little bit of a change, right? You don't need them to get to 100% from the first conversation. It's going to be a gradual experience. Nothing we've ever experienced in our own lives. And this is also the other thing, is we have to look within ourselves. We didn't get to where we are today, myself, all of you listening, from day one. We were shaped by all of our experience, all of our learnings. And if we also remember that that's happening on the other side with the individual we're trying to have a conversation with, that's where you begin to be able to meet people and be able to have a productive conversation to move the work forward.
Wow, thank you for that. And one last question, perhaps. If someone is living in a city without a climate action plan, what can they do? What would your advice be to them?
Start working with communities, finding people who also share in your belief and goals, and start putting different leaders in office, right? Your city policies are a product of who you have elected in office. And so it becomes a community organizing and a political fight you must wage. And it's worth it to do so. Because when you get the right people in leadership that also share the values that you have, that's when you can start making progress. And so you cannot be just making progress on the community level alone and then be stopped every single time you get to, the government level. It has to be working in harmony if we're going to be able to make a difference fast enough. So start organizing, start talking to your neighbors, talking to your friends, growing your groups, start joining organizations like Ecogenia and all these other impact groups, start getting involved and getting other people involved and growing this movement right in your own backyard and then changing and kicking out the leaders who also don't believe in your values.
Well said, and I feel a great way to wrap up this first part of the webinar. So Tyrone, thank you so much for sharing the details on the San Francisco's Climate Action Plan, your views on very pragmatic points of view during this Environment Week. Being conscious of your time, feel free to stay on. Of course, if you must leave to get the day started in San Francisco, we completely understand. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And thanks again for all the enlightening views you shared with us today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed my time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And with that, Leah, over to you to hear a bit more about what can young people do to accelerate climate action?
Okay. So let me open my PowerPoint. Oops, give me one moment for this beautifully awkward transition. While I pull this up, everybody just loosen their shoulders. I know it can be a lot to stay on a webinar for over an hour. So again, we really appreciate you all being here. So here we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And is it showing in presentation mode or can you see my notes? Always the next question.
It's presentation mode.
Excellent. Thank you, Anastasis. So once again, I'm Leah Papazoglou. I'm co-founder of Ecogenia. I'm very excited to just spend a few moments talking to you about this after hearing from Tyrone and hearing from a department of the environment that is so robust, has resources to create a climate action plan that is so well thought out, right? And they're measuring their progress and they're sharing these best practices with the world. It can leave you feeling very inspired, but also quite overwhelmed at feeling like if you're not living in a place like that, how does it apply to you? And how can you take the next steps, whether you're an individual, a young person, maybe you're a part of a policymaking team. I know we've had some folks from mayor's offices and think tanks joining us today. So there's a lot of different intentions for joining today and a lot of different perspectives. But I hope that, part of what I would like to share is a way of thinking about trying to achieve this solution of climate action. So that's part of our goal. As a new nonprofit in Greece, we are hoping to build a national youth climate corps here in Greece, where young people are actually mobilized in action for the climate. So again, I invite you to sort of imagine, no matter where you're calling from, whether it's Greece, somewhere in the States, maybe that isn't as progressive with climate action policies, or somewhere else in the world, regardless of the status of your cities and your locality's climate action plan, imagine you have one, and imagine you have the resources to put towards achieving this, right? Where is the people power going to come from? How are you going to be able to mobilize people quickly and effectively to address, the climate action plan and actually work towards progress? So for us, part of the answer to that are these young people, right? Mobilizing teams of young people in action for the climate. That is what we're trying to do at Ecogenia. Now for us, we've identified these kind of three big challenges in Greece. Youth unemployment is very high. The climate crisis is very urgent, as you just heard, and I think we can all agree on here. And, Greek society, or really society at large, there's a lot of incohesion, if that's a word, and people are disjointed. There's a lot of polarization and people are suffering in many different ways. So we would like to help think about solutions to these three things. So what are they? Paid jobs for young people, making sure there's practical paid work, meaningful work for young people to plug into. Mobilizing people in actual climate action projects that are also localized, that really benefit local communities and not just at a national level that can feel out of reach. For us, these three big challenges within Greece, that also a lot of other cities across the world share these similar challenges, are what we're trying to address. And for us, addressing unemployment, climate urgency, and the challenges in society there is a way to bring these three things together. So unemployment, again, Greek society, climate urgency, and localized climate action. This is where a youth climate corps comes in. It's at the intersection of these three challenges that we see as an opportunity to actually engage and mobilize young people. So what does this actually mean? What we are trying to do is have young people, again, mobilized in these practical projects. So that can be with working with young kids in an education setting. It can be a cleanup project. It can be engaging citizens like our team member Stefanos is doing there, very spontaneously on the trail, talking about climate change and climate action with villagers. Also disaster preparedness and mitigation, especially around wildfires, right? These are just a few examples that we are already doing as an organization to mobilize young people in these practical climate action projects. But these are just examples. This is just where we've started. So if you live somewhere in Greece or somewhere in the world where you think, wow, I see this big need in my community that young people, if trained and equipped appropriately, could help address, right? They have the energy, they have the inspiration, they want to roll up their sleeves, combat their eco-anxiety, their climate anxiety, and get put to work, right? Because as we all know, action is the antidote to despair. So we as an organization, what we are trying to do is mobilize teams of young people like this in climate action projects across the country. We're still in pilot phase, but we're hoping to become a national program. We're working very hard at this. And we're really inspired by AmeriCorps, which is a program in the States. Anastasios, I think, referenced it briefly, our trip to the States, where we learned from the California folks. I myself am an alumni, two-time alumni of AmeriCorps. And I like to show this very simple infographic just so you can kind of understand the scope and how big the impact is in AmeriCorps, right? It has massive benefits for the community. People are more likely to be engaged in their community, volunteer. It improves social cohesion. People are just more engaged after going through this transformative service year experience. Case in point right here, where I felt so inspired that I want to bring a similar model and framework to Greece, to what I consider my other home country as a Greek American. So we are hoping to have similar benefits in the coming years as we grow. And we also have other models to pull from. The top picture is actually the bright orange shirts are kind of a trademark of Unicité, which is a civic service program in France, if anybody here is from France or has heard of it. So these are young people doing service year projects, community projects across the country in France. And that picture on the bottom is our team. Anastasios and I are both there somewhere, where we're actually in California, learning from California Conservation Corps about how they mobilize teams of young people in conservation projects that benefit the state of California. And the San Francisco Department of the Environment actually has their own small climate fellow and climate corps program as well, where they bring in young people to help work on very specific projects across the department. So this service year idea, this youth core idea, is not unique. It's unique to Greece, and we are bringing this model to Greece, but there are best practices from all over the world. These are just two examples. And we have these organizations as mentors, and wherever you're calling in today, there could be a service year program in your country. Maybe you don't know about it yet. And these are really effective ways to, again, mobilize teams of young people in very practical climate action projects. So we see it as a very important supplement to a climate action plan, where young people can actually help achieve, the targets and the goals within a climate action plan. So that's a tiny bit more about what we're doing. And I would like to just encourage you all again to take a moment to imagine, wherever you are, what a climate action plan or climate action strategy with really measurable goals could do for the region that you're in or the region that you're from, and also how young people can help get you to achieve those goals, right? And we are, of course, here as an organization, welcome to chat, eager to chat with you about what we're doing, how we can perhaps help accelerate your work, or how you could plug into our existing work. So my email is at the beginning of the presentation. I'll drop it in the chat. We also have our general one here. You can like, follow, and share on all of our platforms. And I hope it just gives you a little bit of food for thought on, again, how to kind of take all these things to the next level, bring opportunity for young people, and help us get to this point where we are taking the necessary steps to really, get us to net zero and get us to a place where we can have a sustainable future for all. So that is it from my end. Thank you all for listening. I will stop sharing. Anastasis, you may take it over. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take a pause here and answer anything that may have come up for people.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leah. Let's wait a few moments for some questions, if there are any, which we'll also answer at the end of the webinar. So feel free to type in your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box of Zoom.
I also have to give a shout out because we do have a few cohort members and alumni on the call today. So thank you all for joining. It's really nice to see all of your names in the chat and have you all participate today. So hello. Fantastic.
Thank you, Leah, for this presentation. And let me share that ever since I heard the name of Ecogenia and like the generation with vision, it's stuck with me. It's a great vision and something very much needed in Greece as well. And you all heard Tyrone say about how stakeholder engagement is important, about how engaging the community is important. And I feel the enthusiasm of youth is what can really drive this forward, along with some very good strategies, I would say, a robust vision. And sometimes for this, we also need data, which gets us to the last part of our webinar today, which is all about data for green, as we sort of call it. And that's the reason Dataphoria was born. So let me just share my screen as well. And show you actually a dashboard. I thought this was the best way to cover everything we need to cover. As many of you might know, we are right now into the European Green Week. This is a week starting on the World Environment Day on June 5th. And for that week, we're having Europe-wide events, webinars, environmental actions, all focused around sustainability. And many times we do hold these events separately. We don't really know what the other person is doing, except only if they are in our network. But this is something that can really change with data. So this year, for the first year with the European Climate Pact, we decided we're going to collect all the events that will be taking place as part of the European Green Week and put them all together in a dashboard that is publicly available to collect the data, as we say. All these events are run by European Climate Pact ambassadors during this first iteration. But of course, this is open for anyone to register their own event. So right now we can see there are over 22 events happening, most of them taking place in a face-to-face version, some of them like this one online, some other in hybrid. And we have the opportunity to see all these events, get a bit more information about anyone we need, and also join it and follow it up if we need to. And that's part of what we're trying to undertake with Dataphoria. I mean, we know there is this large wave of sustainability coming towards our way, either with regulations or expectations for businesses. As we said, net zero cities also governed by climate law, also by the expectations of citizens, as it very much should. And for all of that, we need data. So Dataphoria, we are a bunch of data scientists that really understand sustainability and want to use their data skills in order to advance sustainability transition. And the way we do this is by using some very advanced data science techniques to collect data from different sources. It can be in very, very specific databases or some very simple spreadsheets, or it can even be offline and collected with forms. And all we want to do is to end up with, instead of having Excel, instead of having offline data, beautiful dashboards where you can have all the information in place and understand what our company, what our city, what our country is doing to fight climate change and to advance the sustainability transition. So that's part of what we can sort of achieve with data. And just to leave you with a final image is what we call green infographics, which we are very proud about. And it's all about consolidating all the data we might have into data stories that can simplify the message and the communication regarding what's going on around sustainability and climate change, just to leave you with an image of what we are doing with our Nea Smyrni partners, where we're spreading the message on recycling and also on the city's carbon footprint and what they're going to do to reduce it. So thank you. That's all from Dataphoria. And at this point, I'd really like to thank our co-hosts, Impact Hub, supported by Google, and iphoria.net, as well as the EU Climate Pact for providing the auspices and the support for this event. And over to you, Leah, for some final words, perhaps.
I was just going to say you are so good at keeping these short because of all the pitches that you're in and that you win. Anastasis is extremely humble, and the data work he's doing it continues to impress me the farther you get in your journey as a co-founder. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I must say, just reflecting on our time in California, when we did meet the San Francisco folks, Anastasis in particular was incredibly enthusiastic about the data-driven approach that San Francisco has taken for their climate action strategy and their plan, and how they were measuring it and reporting back on it. So again, for anybody here that may be thinking about setting goals and figuring out how to measure them and creating dashboards, I can very confidently say, I think Anastasis is your guide to help you get there, because he's definitely our guru when it comes to thinking about data. So thank you, Anastasis. If anybody has any questions, I know there were one or two questions that we didn't get to with Tyrone. He did share his email in the beginning of his PowerPoint, and Anastasis, we can double check with Tyrone to make sure he's okay with us sending out his PowerPoint deck, which I'm sure he will be, and his contact info is there. So some of you could follow up if you like. I think it was Christina was hoping that he could maybe present, even within her municipality, which would be incredible if that happened. Please let us know if that does happen. We'd love to be able to share that story as a follow-up to the webinar. But yeah, I just want to give folks time and space to ask any other questions. We'll wait, we'll see if anything comes up for about a couple seconds here. It's nice to see you, Ian, as well. I think with that, unless there's any burning questions that pop up, we can wrap up here.
Yeah, I feel we can. And just before we close off this session, let us give you a small taste of what's going to come next, because we intend to make this a recurring theme. So we have other contacts in other cities all over the world, and without revealing too much, we might be following up with another similar session from another city in another place of the world, learning all about how they intend to tackle the climate change and how they intend to reach net zero in their own personal space.
Yes, I hope we do more of these. I do kind of love webinars. So thank you all. We will be sending you the recording to this as promised. So that will be available on YouTube. We'll hopefully send that by tomorrow. And again, feel free to share with colleagues, friends, family, follow up with us if you do have questions. And thank you all so much for being here for an hour and 20 minutes of your time on a weeknight. I know it can be a lot to ask. So thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.